American clergyman Henry Ward Beecher once said, "The beginning is the promise of the end." He intended this statement as advice for aspiring writers, but it has a universality that is difficult to ignore. Our world is full of beginnings and ends. A fire starts, a fire dies. The tide rises, the tide falls. Lights go on, and lights go off. Beginnings are exciting. They bring with them novelty and the hope of a bright future. Ends are frightening. They bring a finality that no one wishes to confront. So we idealize living in the present, and, as intended, free ourselves from fear. As always, though, life is a great balancing act. It hurts, but we lose something by ignoring the inevitable truth carried by conclusion. Nothing lasts forever. For centuries, poets have grieved the victims of transience, whether it is life, as in John Crowe Ransom's Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter, love, as in Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, or anything good, as in Robert Frost's Nothing Gold Can Stay. Ephemerality affects everyone. Accepting it requires naught but confrontation. First, we find John Crowe Ransom in his family cemetery, ruminating on the finality of death in his poem Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter.
Hello, gentlemen. I'm John Crowe Ransom, son of John James Ransom. I was born in Pulaski, Tennessee, of course, April 30th, 1888. I was married to Rob Reevil in 1920 and raised 3 children until my eventual death in 1974. You may think I'm just a poet because you know my work, but I like to think I'm more than that. I was an editor, and not just an editor, but an educator. I began my career as a teacher of Greek and Latin in Lewisburg. After a while, I became a member of the English department of Vanderbilt in 1914, where I had graduated first in my class only 5 years before. And after a short detour in France, artillery division of course, I founded the Fugitives. It was a literary group, and we focused our talents on modern poetry. After a while, I became a member of the English department of Vanderbilt in 1914, where I had graduated first in my class only 5 years ago. And after a short detour in France, artillery division of course, I returned and founded the Fugitives. It was a southern literary group, not to be exclusionary, northerners were allowed, and we focused our talents on modern poetry. I edited and wrote for the group, and even helped to start a magazine by the same name, The Fugitive. My poetry career was short yet successful. My first volume, entitled Poems About God, was even praised by Robert Frost. In my time, I won the Bollingen Prize for Poetry in 1951 and the National Book Award in 1952. It was quite a life, if I do say so myself. But you're here for something a little different than some old man's autobiography. Why don't we move on to my work? So without further ado, Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter. Body, and such lightness in her footfall. It is no wonder that her brown study astonishes us all. Her wars were brighted in our high window. We looked among orchard trees and beyond, where she took arms against her shadow, or harried unto the pond the lazy geese. Like a snow cloud, dripping their snow on the green grass, tricking and stopping, sleepy and proud. Who cried in goose? Alas, for the tireless heart within the little lady with rod that made them rise from their noon apple dreams and scuttle, goose fashion under the skies. But now go the bells, and we are ready. In one house we are sternly stopped to say we are vexed at her brown study, lying so primly propped.
Next, we have funeral home director Brent White reflecting on his latest client in the context of analyzing John Crowe Ransom's Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter.
The theme of death is interwoven throughout Bells for John Whiteside's Daughter. It's talking about a death of a girl who used to be carefree and full of life. The poem starts at the stanza that speaks to the degree of how surprised everyone is to see that this girl has died. It then goes on to show us how energetic she is, like a typical child. She danced around and did things like chase geese, like many normal children would do. She likely didn't even think about dying. Most kids think that they're indestructible, and adults seem to think the same about them. The shock geese flying away in the poem represents the shock of the people who knew this lively child. This poem reminds us that even though we may think we will never face the inevitable thing called death, we need to be prepared for when it happens. The little girl can be seen as people today who care about work and other activities. We never care about just how fragile life is. And this is because we are constantly distracted and think that modern medicine can save us. We can be having a business meeting and all of a sudden fall over from a heart attack that no one expected. Like in the poem, it would be a surprise to us and the people around us. The poem was written in 1924, and people were not living as long then as they are now. Kids back then also had a much greater chance of dying before they're reaching adulthood. Today, this poem should hit us even harder because we're not as in touch with death as we would have been in the past. The little girl had a routine, and since she didn't know that she was going to die, she could not change her routine to go along with preparing for death. We too have our routines, and if we die suddenly like the little girl, people will just remember us for the things we do every day. Crowe Ransom is telling us to change up that routine and live the lives that we want to be remembered by. When the poem talks about the bells going and being ready, it is saying we cannot control if someone dies, just as we cannot control the bells ringing. The bells are also a sign that you should wake up and move on with your life, because you cannot bring that person back. This poem should serve as a message to many that someday our lives will be over and we need to act as if every day is going to be our last.
We find Andrew Marvell on the bank of the Umber, the river in which his father drowned, and has come to remind him of passing time and his poem To His Coy Mistress.
Yes, I was told someone was impressed with my work. How marvelous. My name is Andrew Marvell. I was born on March 31st, 1621 in Winstead, England. However, I died on August 16th, 1678 in London, England. I began grammar school at a young age, and then at 13 I attended Trinity College, Cambridge, and I received my BA degree and actually began publishing poetry. However, I quit my master's studies after my father drowned. I then began to travel abroad throughout Europe, and I wrote lyrical poetry. I actually wrote my most famous poem, To His Coy Mistress, while I was at the Fairfax's Nun Appleton house while I was tutoring Mary Fairfax, later to be the Duchess of Buckingham. When I was 32, I met John Milton, who introduced me to politics and guided me to become involved in government. In 1659, I became a member of Parliament, and I also added political satire to my already impressive repertoire. Anywho, enough about me. You came here to hear about my work, To His Coy Mistress. Allow me to read it to you. This coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long-love's day. Though by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find, I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song, then worms shall try that long-preserved virginity. Your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Now, therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may. And now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour, than languish in this slow chapid hour. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rust strife through the iron gates of life. Thus we cannot make our son still, yet we will make him run.
To give his thoughts on To His Coy Mistress, we have luckless in love teenager Michael Morris in his favorite place to just sit and think.
There's this poem I was thinking about the other day. It's called To His Coy Mistress. I don't know, it just seems to apply to me at my age and at this time. Let me kind of just explain the poem, I guess. To His Coy Mistress starts with the narrator addressing a woman who remains nameless throughout the poem. The woman he addresses is ignoring the sexual advancements he's attempting to make. The poem is considered a Carpe Diem love poem because it comments on the finality of life and all the possibilities of love if one were constrained by death. The narrator believes he could spend years admiring each part of his mistress's body. After this, he concludes with the idea that they will not be able to be with each other in death. He wants to admire her all his life, but he knows he will not be able to do that. Wishing he could live forever, he describes the passing of time with historical events, and while he admires her throughout their eternity together. While this seems somewhat pessimistic because it's obvious that they will not live for this long span of time, there is some optimism as well. That's the reason it's called a Carpe Diem poem, because although they will not be able to enjoy each other as long as they wish, they should embrace the time they have together as much and as often as possible. This kind of comes into play in my life. I'm in love. I didn't think I would be, at least not at this age. Yet here I am, a teenager in love, and maybe in over his head. I know I'm going to die someday. That's not what I'm worried about. I worry that what I have will last till death, like most relationships. Love and loss. They act like you can't have one without the other. I don't know. Maybe that is true. I'm not ready for loss. I can brace for impact all I want, but I won't be ready. And if everything works out in the end, death won't elude me. It never eludes anybody. I'm surely no different. Love is fading thing so often. I just gotta hold on to it before it fades. I gotta live in the moment as if I don't have a choice. It will be tough. People my age always try to prepare for the future, and I'm no different. Where are you going to college? Do you have a job yet? So constantly we are asked about and concerned about only our future, as if the present didn't lead to the future. And sometimes I have to imagine a future without her, but not today. Today I don't imagine. Today I go to her and I hold on to her, not as if I'm going to lose her, but like I could never let her go, which is the truth.
We end with Robert Frost, who is on a remote corner of his farm, as always contemplating rural life and the beauty of nature, and his poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay.
I apologize if it seemed as if I was ignoring you. Just got caught up in my memories. When you're as old as I am, you find yourself straddling two paths, one that leads into the future and the other that leads into the past. But what's a shame is that I can see the end of the path, but I can no longer see the beginning. Come on now, I didn't mean to get you down too much. The name's Frost, Robert Frost. I was born March 26, 1874, in the city of San Francisco, in the Great Republic of California. My daddy, William, was a journalist until he died of consumption at my mere age of 11. After his death, we moved out to Massachusetts, Lawrence, Massachusetts to be exact, with my mother and sister, and my grandparents. In the high school from which I graduated in Lawrence in 1992 was where I first met my wife, Eleanor. I spent a few weeks up at Dartmouth too, taking in the New England's Ivy scene, but it didn't suit me. I dropped out. I published my first poem, My Butterfly, an elegy, in 1894, and I thought perhaps Eleanor would give me her hand after hearing of this success. She declined. She said she wanted to finish school first. She didn't appear to be all that impressed. Frankly, I thought I had lost her to someone else. I ripped up the poem, and I fled to the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia. Quite an appropriate name considering my situation. Dismal Frost was slowly swallowed by the swamp of despair. I nearly lost it too. I returned to Massachusetts and I proposed once again to my Eleanor. She had completed her studies at St. Lawrence University, and I became overcome with joy and love for her presence in my life. We were married December 19th, 1895, and the year after, our son Elliot was born. I began to pursue a career as a teacher. I had a growing boy to support. I began to help my mother at the school that she worked at. 3 years before the turn of the century, I started at Harvard. Alas, after 2 years, I left due to health concerns. I had to find a trade. Eleanor was pregnant again, this time a girl, Leslie. At the beginning of the new millennium, we moved to a New Hampshire farm my dear grandfather acquired for us. Within the 12 years that we spent there, with me riding and trying to be a farmer, 4 more children arrived. There was a boy, Carol, in 1902, a girl, Irma, in 1903, another girl, Marjorie, in 1905, and one more girl, Eleanor, in 1907. Sadly, Elliot died in 1900. Carol committed suicide in 1940. Irma developed a mental disability. Marjorie died in her late 20s in childbirth, and sweet baby Eleanor died within days of her birth. After moving to England, my poetic works finally gained some notoriety. We moved back home, and I wrote more and taught at schools galore. Even so, none of this success can make up for the losses of my children, and Eleanor. She passed in 1938. Not only Irma and Leslie survived with my nuclear family. It reminds me of one of my poems, Nothing Gold Can Stay. It's surely true about my life's treasures. Nature's first green is gold, her heart is hue to hold, her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then least decides to leave, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay.
In a park threatened by urbanization, we find environmental activist Ken Lucas struggling with the changing world in terms of thoughts on Robert Frost's Nothing Gold Can Stay.
At first glance, Robert Frost's brief poem appears to mainly concern the impermanence of life in nature. Frost purposefully implements imagery to draw a picture of the budding greenness of life by saying, nature's first green is gold, and her early leaves a flower. At the same time, he develops the idea that this very goldenness must come to pass, calling it her hardest hue to hold. By the end of the poem, Frost declares that the fresh, golden springiness at the peak of a plant's life must then eventually fade and wilt away. This focus on the beautiful but transient qualities of nature call us to reassess the importance of nature in our lives, with the goal of treating it with elevated respect. Now, while this is all true, Frost intended for his language to reach beyond its literal meaning. He wanted his depiction of the ephemerality of life in nature to apply to our own lives. The gold he references in the natural world represents the best of moments in our lives, our fruitful relationships, ideals and traits we value, or whatever brings us fulfillment in general. But these highlights are short-lived, as Frost reminds us how gold, despite our best efforts, is the hardest hue to hold. However badly we wish to live forever in a time or place that brings us happiness, we are forced to let it go because of the fact that life must move forward with or without us. This might sound depressing, but Frost aimed to deliver a more positive effect. We could choose to dwell on the fact that nothing good will last forever, but if we read between the lines, we can understand his poem more as a challenge to view our experiences in a different light. Instead of desperately trying to hold on to the golden past, we must try to move on with our lives. In the poem, Frost never implies that life comes to a halt after the gold fades. Rather, he tells us that dawn goes on today, meaning that although the fleeting radiance of dawn will inevitably pass, the entire day lies ahead. Within the context of the human experience, this is an encouragement to accept that although we might believe the golden days are behind us, our whole lives remain. After all, who's to say that even more golden times are yet to come? The only way to find out is to accept reality, look forward, and remain hopeful.
Nothing lasts forever. It may tear at our insides to confront this, but that doesn't make it less true. The 3 poems we have studied present 2 options moving forward. We can surrender and collapse in time's pitiless palm, or we can resolve to fight back and make the most of the time we are allowed.